The Galaxy Explorer already has 3 alternative builds right out of the box and gives an incredible value because of that. But these models end up being a little too similar, with them just being 3 different triangle ships at slightly different sizes. I thought it could be a fun experience to pick an alternative model that is found online, and for this I chose the Planetary Explorer by Brent. You might be familiar with some of his builds, as he is the creator who submitted the original ideas sets for the Ecto 1 and the Seinfeld set. I've also done a video of his in the past with the Ecto 1 V2 and have been very impressed with his models. Another model that I saw online that I was slightly interested in would be the Galaxy Geoscience vehicle, and I think this could be an interesting ground vehicle for a space display. Let me know if you'd be interested in me building this so you can see it, and maybe I'll get to it in the future. The Planetary Explorer is going to be one of the biggest alternative builds that I've ever done, and knowing that the Galaxy Explorer has almost 1,300 pieces, I'm going to do my best to be organized and make this process a bit easier and maybe faster. I think I'm going to try and separate the first half of the bags that are mostly gray into one section of my box, and the more colorful pieces I'm going to put in this other one, and hopefully it'll make it a bit easier to build. The instructions for the Planetary Explorer are found on Brent Waller's website, or you can find them on Ribrickable. They'll be about $10, which I think is worth it if you can get this set on sale in the first place. With your purchase, you'll get a zip file that have 4 different PDFs, with the main build being the Planetary Explorer, but there's also some side builds like the Research Pod, the Mineral Detector, as well as a bonus build. Out of the 4 options, I'm going to start by building the Research Pod base. So far, I really enjoy the design of the image for this instruction book, with that classic yellow border and name just like on the box. And it has the Waller Customs logo in the bottom corner. And these instructions are going to be pretty typical and look just like Lego instructions. At the end of building this section, you have that moon surface with the pod supports, which use those blue fin pieces, and that's kind of an interesting use of the part for me. Unfortunately, you put those on before you do some of the greebling. Maybe these should have been added after those gray cheese slopes, just to make it a little bit easier to put them on. To finish the moon base, you have to go to the Planetary Explorer instructions, and after the ship is built, you can get to the base. For me though, I'm going to finish building that pod before I build the ship, just to get rid of some of those larger blue pieces, and hopefully it'll help me get through all the other parts later on. After finishing the pod, you can figure out what configuration you want and put it on the stands. There are columns on the bottom that line up with those feet, and that helps with alignment. It is somewhat of a hollow build though, so you need to be a little bit careful when putting it on so you don't just crush it. And this is going to add a lot to my space display, just having a station. Let's move on to the main build. The first part of the Planetary Explorer you build is the cockpit, which uses a really cool snot technique to make the floor attach. One of my favorite things about this build is that there are a lot of really fun angles that are created with the different parts that you wouldn't expect, like in the back wings where they create sort of a Star Wars gunship sort of look, and the front cockpit is a really sharp angle. It has a really interesting connection using some Technic pins on the sides. Just like the Galaxy Explorer, this one also features an interesting technique for connecting the wing, featuring a bunch of different bar pieces and studs, just to give that nice front angle. After building the ship, it might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I did the bonus build, which ends up being a little station with some antennas and such. There's some playability. You can move around the different parts on it, and it just ends up using some of those extra prints that weren't used for the other build. The last build that I got to for this was the mineral detector, and honestly it was pretty straightforward. What you see is what you get. And surprisingly, there's a decent amount of extra pieces left after building everything. You could probably go through and build an additional something, or use these with your own parts to build something more substantial. Now that everything's built, here are all the side builds with that research pod, the bonus build being a little space station, and of course the mineral detector. All these have their own little quirks and charms, with the research pod having opening and closing doors and an attachable ladder. It can be lowered and raised. Unfortunately though, if the ladder is on in the current state, the doors don't close on the way. I did find a solution for this though. All you gotta do is take off that ladder. This fix is going to require a plain 1x2 gray plate that isn't found in the set. Put it on top of the ladder, and if you put the ladder underneath the platform, it'll still be able to fold down and create a even more even leveled walkway for the spaceman to go up. And now the doors can close. You can pretend that there's an airlock in there so the spaceman can breathe. And I do think that the mineral detector is kind of fun. It has this one arm that's a bit easier to move around, which could be used for detecting. And both arms can be slightly adjusted with the 1x1 round stud with the bar connection. So there's even a little bit more play value there. Let's move on to the Planetary Explorer. I think the main thing to say about this model is that it is very unique in shape and style, and I'd be really interested to see what the basis for the design is. It has kind of Star Wars dropship sort of feel to it, but isn't quite that. The interior can be accessed from either side of the set, depending on where you want to be. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of room for getting in and moving figures, so it might be better to get the figures in while you're building it so you don't have to later. Otherwise, you'll be reaching in there and everything. Interior is a bit disappointing. Everything's a little flat, which again is just parts available. There aren't a lot of hinge pieces or anything where you could do different designs in there. It's very straightforward and practical. And it's nice with all the different side builds. You have enough spots for all the different spacemen. They don't all have to be in the spaceship. The wings are at a fun angle and even still have those landing gear on them on the sides of the wings and in the front of the ship. Something that bugs me a little bit is that the landing gear doesn't lay completely flat. The back ones are at a sort of angle upwards. This one ends up folding into the bottom. So if you made it shorter, it wouldn't fit with the snot method that I showed for putting the floor of the ship in. And kind of suffers from the first design of this where the landing gear isn't super sturdy and it'll fall off. But it is just nice to have landing gear in the first place. Bottom of the ship has a very studless design, which is a bit of a positive for having a very smooth look, but also a negative because you're not going to have very many places to connect studs to put clear pieces and pose it in whatever different way. On top of that, it's also very heavy and the weight isn't very evenly distributed, so you're going to have a very hard time with that in the first place. I do really enjoy the design of the turbines. They have that interesting use of the bucket piece. The wings are pretty sleek and have an interesting angle throughout them, which I'm just saying a lot just because the shaping of the set is so weird and different. Thrusters all over the place, so this ship isn't going to be going slow anywhere. One downside to the design of this is the amount of Technic brick showing, but since this can only use the parts in the set, it is just kind of how it's going to be. Honestly, it looks a little incomplete if you don't have the base attached. And to go with that plate feature, this base comes off of the stands, and you can now put it in the back of the dropship like you can see here. I almost wish that it just slid on and didn't hold in with the Technic pins, just because it ends up being a little bit harder to get off sometimes. But it looks much more complete with it on. Something else that isn't great about this set is the ends of the wings. They have a very weak design where if you press on them incorrectly, they'll break off, which that part isn't the biggest thing. What I am noticing though is there is a gap right underneath this tile piece. I'm just going to use parts from my collection. 1x1 studs. I think that's going to be a good fix. And now that bracket isn't going to be falling off as much. And just with the proportions of this, it ends up differing from the Galaxy Explorer because that ship is long and thin, and this one is bulky, but still very swooshable. You can hold it with one hand. From the back, it's a little bit more sturdy, and you can move it around. You're not going to be breaking this that much. Just those tips of the wings like you saw when I picked it up, and I pointed out earlier. For an alternative build, I definitely think Brent used a lot of the pieces to their full potential, but I think that there are quite a few extra pieces that could be put in different spots to enhance the build even more. Like, there's still additional triangle pieces that could be used on the wings to give them more angles. I like the idea of putting them at the back of the cheese slopes for an additional angle and kind of continues the design going down the wing. With the extra antenna pieces, you can put them at the top of the wings in the different positions, or I also like the idea of putting them towards the base of those wings and having them fold like that. These could be seen as fuel sort of rods or antennas to communicate with the base, or even if you put them at the front, you could have them be additional guns of some sort. But I do think these are definitely fun pieces and should be used. And I think the must-do modification that wasn't included is using these extra Technic pins as extra guns at the front. You can put them on those modified 1x1 bricks on either side and just give it some more interesting details at the front with 2 different varying blaster styles. And here are all of the builds in my classic space display. They provide a really great level of variety and add a lot to it. Having the space station is a very welcome addition and is something that was missing from the Galaxy Explorer re-release. Unfortunately though, because of the weight of the Planetary Explorer, you're not going to have a very easy time posing it in any dynamic ways. And here it is next to the Galaxy Explorer. The wingspan is a little bit longer on the Planetary Explorer. And from the front, you can see that it is a bit taller. And a lot of the parts go to that vertical build versus the length. They provide very different building experiences, and the techniques are honestly very different except for the wing designs. Of course, where the Planetary Explorer stands out is with that extra set of builds with the pod and the mineral detector. The volume of stuff ends up seeming like a lot more, and I would definitely recommend this if you can get the Galaxy Explorer for $50. Spend 10 more on these extra instructions. It gives you something that looks a bit different, adds a little bit of variety, but it also has some negatives, obviously, like I pointed out, with some weak connections and not being able to pose it as much due to the weight and studless bottom. But honestly, I'm just amazed that this is the same Lego set as the ship on the right. And it's always great to see the level of creativity that some designers have with taking one Lego set and figuring out different ways to make it a completely different experience. But I do think that this build might not be for everyone, and it's up to personal taste. If you like what you saw today, don't forget to like and subscribe. I've been Rick Radiop. I also have other classic space videos on the channel, so go check those out if you want to see more. And I'll see you in the next video.